From a cast and crew drugged with PCP to a demo recording that became an Oscar winner, the making of James Cameron's Titanic was almost as dramatic as the disaster itself. Behind Leonardo DiCaprio's charming Jack and Kate Winslet's elegant Rose lies a production filled with bizarre accidents, surprising refusals, casting near misses, and coincidences stranger than fiction. Here are 15 weird facts you didn't know about Titanic. Fact 1. The entire crew was drugged with PCP-laced chowder. On August 9, 1996, the cast and crew of Titanic experienced one of the strangest nights in film production history when someone poisoned their dinner with a powerful hallucinogenic drug. The incident happened during the final night of filming in Halifax, Nova Scotia, where James Cameron was shooting the modern-day framing sequences featuring Bill Paxton as a treasure hunter searching the wreck. Around midnight, which served as the lunch break for their night shooting schedule, a local catering company served up what everyone agreed was an absolutely delicious batch of clam chowder. Crew members were going back for second and third bowls because it tasted so good, and even Cameron himself came down from his office to join the meal and toast the successful wrap of their Nova Scotia shoot. About 30 minutes after eating, people started noticing something was seriously wrong. One crew member, a large electrician, began talking rapidly and told his colleagues he felt like he was on something and would definitely know the feeling. Standby painter Marilyn McAvoy, who had never experienced hallucinogens before, said she was terrified when the effects kicked in because she had no frame of reference for what was happening to her. Cameron initially feared he had been poisoned with paralytic shellfish neurotoxin and forced himself to vomit in his trailer to get it out of his system before the drug fully took hold. When he returned to the set, he found it completely abandoned, which only added to his dissociative experience and made him feel like he was in an episode of The Twilight Zone. Eventually, around 80 people were rushed to the hospital, where the scene became even more surreal. Crew members refused to stay in their curtained cubicles and were running through the aisles, jumping into each other's spaces, and even doing wheelies down the hallways in wheelchairs. Hospital staff gave everyone charcoal drinks to remove the toxins from their systems, and by sunrise, most people had started coming down from the high. The Nova Scotia Department of Health later confirmed that the chowder had been laced with PCP, also known as angel dust. But despite a police investigation that lasted until February 1999, the culprit was never identified. Cameron later said he believed a crew member they had fired the day before spiked the food to get revenge on the caterers, but the case remains officially unsolved to this day. Fact 2. The movie cost more than the real ship. When James Cameron set out to make Titanic in 1997, he didn't just create one of the most expensive films ever made at the time. He actually spent more money on the movie than it cost to build the actual ship. The film's production budget reached $200 million, which was a staggering amount that made studio executives extremely nervous. To put that in perspective, the real RMS Titanic, which was constructed between 1910 and 1912 at the Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast, cost approximately $7.5 million to build. Now, you might think that $7.5 million in 1912 money would obviously be worth much more today. And you'd be right. When you adjust that amount for inflation to $1997, the year the film was released, the real ship cost somewhere between $120 million and $150 million to construct. That means Cameron's movie still cost at least $50 million more than the actual ocean liner it was depicting, even after accounting for nearly a century of inflation. The film's massive budget went toward building a nearly full-scale replica of the ship in Rosarito, Mexico, creating a specialized 17-million-gallon water tank, developing cutting-edge digital effects to populate the ship with computer-generated passengers, and ensuring every historical detail was perfect, from the specific china patterns in the dining room to the exact brand of life jackets used on board. Cameron also conducted multiple dangerous dives to the actual Titanic wreck site on the ocean floor to capture real footage, which added significantly to the production costs. At the time, the escalating budget made Paramount Pictures so anxious about potential losses that Cameron actually gave up his entire $8 million director's salary and his profit percentage just to prove his commitment to the project. The gamble paid off spectacularly when Titanic became the highest-grossing film of all time, earning over $2.2 billion worldwide and proving that sometimes spending more than an actual ocean liner can actually be worth it. Fact 3. Leonardo DiCaprio refused to audition and almost lost the role. Leonardo DiCaprio's path to becoming Jack Dawson in Titanic was almost derailed by his own attitude during the casting process. When director James Cameron first met with DiCaprio, the young actor had already made a strong impression in Hollywood with his performance in What's Eating Gilbert Grape, which earned him an Oscar nomination when he was just 19 years old. By the time Cameron was casting Titanic in 1996, DiCaprio had built enough of a reputation that he felt he no longer needed to audition for roles. Cameron recalled that the initial meeting with DiCaprio went incredibly well, with the director noting that every woman in his office somehow found a reason to attend, including the accountant who had no business being there. DiCaprio charmed everyone in the room, and Cameron thought he might have found his Jack. However, Cameron still needed to see how DiCaprio would work with Kate Winslet, who had already been cast as Rose, so he scheduled a screen test for a few days later. When DiCaprio arrived for what he thought was just another casual meeting, Cameron had cameras set up to record a test scene. DiCaprio looked around confused and asked if he was supposed to be reading lines. When Cameron confirmed this was an audition, DiCaprio replied flatly, "Oh, I don't read," meaning he no longer did auditions. Without hesitation, Cameron stood up, shook DiCaprio's hand, and said, "Well, thanks for coming by." DiCaprio suddenly realized the role was slipping away and quickly backpedaled, asking if refusing to read really meant he wouldn't get the part just like that. Cameron explained that Titanic was going to consume 2 years of his life and cost $200 million, so he wasn't going to mess it up by making the wrong casting choice. He told DiCaprio firmly, "You're going to read or you're not going to get the part." DiCaprio reluctantly agreed, and Cameron said that when he called action, every ounce of DiCaprio's negative energy vanished as he transformed into Jack, creating instant chemistry with Winslet that convinced Cameron he had found his leading man. Fact 4. Matthew McConaughey auditioned with his Texas accent and was rejected. It's hard to imagine anyone but Leonardo DiCaprio as Jack Dawson, but before Leo ever stepped onto the set of Titanic, Matthew McConaughey came incredibly close to landing the role. McConaughey was brought in to do a screen test with Kate Winslet, who had already been cast as Rose, and by all accounts, the audition went really well. Winslet was reportedly taken with McConaughey's presence and charm, and the chemistry between them was completely fantastic. McConaughey himself has talked about walking out of that audition feeling confident that he had nailed it, and for a brief moment, it seemed like Jack Dawson might have had a Southern accent. But here's where things took an unexpected turn. When McConaughey performed the scene, he delivered his lines in his natural Texas drawl, the signature accent that audiences know and love him for today. After the reading, James Cameron told him, "That's great, now let's try it a different way," essentially asking McConaughey to drop the accent and read the lines again without the Southern flavor. Jack Dawson was written as a poor artist from Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin, and Cameron clearly had a specific vision for how the character should sound. But McConaughey, perhaps feeling confident in his interpretation or simply preferring his own approach, responded with, "No, that was pretty good, thanks." And just like that, his chances of playing Jack Dawson were over. According to late producer John Landau's memoir, The Bigger Picture, Cameron knew immediately that McConaughey wasn't the right fit after that exchange. "Let's just say that was it for McConaughey," Landau wrote. The role eventually went to DiCaprio, who created one of the most iconic characters in film history, and McConaughey went on to have his own incredibly successful career, winning an Oscar for Dallas Buyers Club in 2014. But that one moment of refusing to take direction meant that Titanic sailed on without him, and film history was forever changed by a simple "no thanks." Fact 5. There was a real J. Dawson buried in Halifax. One of the strangest coincidences in movie history involves a gravestone in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and the fictional hero of Titanic. James Cameron named his main character Jack Dawson, a poor artist who wins a ticket onto the doomed ship in a poker game. But what Cameron didn't know until after the film was released is that there was actually a real person named Jay Dawson who died on the Titanic and is buried in Fairview Lawn Cemetery in Halifax, where 121 victims of the disaster are laid to rest. The headstone simply reads, Jay Dawson died April 15, 1912, along with the body number 227, which was assigned when his remains were recovered from the Atlantic Ocean. For years, people assumed that J stood for James, but researchers later discovered his real name was Joseph Dawson, an Irishman from Dublin who worked as a coal trimmer in the ship's boiler room, shoveling coal in the hot, dangerous depths of the vessel. Unlike Leonardo DiCaprio's character, Joseph Dawson didn't sketch portraits or fall in love with a first-class passenger. He was a working-class crew member doing one of the hardest jobs on the ship. After Titanic became a massive hit in 1997, the modest grave suddenly turned into a pilgrimage site for fans who believed they were visiting Jack Dawson's final resting place. Throughout the late 1990s and early 2000s, young moviegoers left flowers, love notes, and even ticket stubs at the gravestone, with some visitors weeping over what they thought was their beloved fictional hero. Cemetery tour guide Blair Bede, a Halifax historian, remembered seeing fathers bringing their daughters to the grave during what should have been spring break vacations, standing there crying together. Producer John Landau confirmed in an interview that the filmmakers had no idea about the real Jay Dawson until after the movie came out, saying that Joseph Dawson received more notoriety decades after his death than he ever would have had in life. James Cameron has repeatedly insisted that the name Jack Dawson was simply something he made up for his character and that the connection to the real grave was pure coincidence. Fact 6. Celine Dion's Oscar-winning song was recorded in secret. One of the most iconic movie songs of all time almost never made it into Titanic, and when it finally did, it happened through an act of creative rebellion. James Cameron had made it clear from the very beginning that he didn't want a pop song anywhere in his movie. He told composer James Horner that Titanic was serious enough on its own and didn't need violins soaring away with a song pasted in at the end. Cameron wanted his epic disaster film to stand alone without what he saw as a cheap Hollywood addition, and he even compared it to putting a song at the end of Schindler's List. But Horner had other ideas. As he worked on the film's score, he started developing a melody that he thought could work as a vocal piece, and he couldn't shake the feeling that it had real potential as a song. He reached out to lyricist Will Jennings, who wrote the words from the perspective of an elderly person looking back across many years. Then Horner contacted Celine Dion and her husband, René Angelil, to see if she would be interested in singing it. At first, Dion wasn't enthusiastic either. She had already recorded Beauty and the Beast and Because You Loved Me for other films, and she didn't want to become known only as the voice of movie themes. More importantly, she knew the director didn't even want a song in his movie. Renee convinced her to fly to Los Angeles and record just a quick demo that they could present to Cameron. Dion walked into the studio feeling hesitant, but once Horner explained the story of Titanic to her, she was moved to tears. She dimmed the lights, stepped into the vocal booth, and sang the entire song in one single take. That recording, made quickly as just a demonstration, was so perfect that it became the actual version used in the film. Horner waited until Cameron was in the right mood before playing him the demo, and after listening to it several times, Cameron finally agreed to include it. The song went on to win the Academy Award for Best Original Song and became one of the biggest-selling singles in history. Fact 7. James Cameron forfeited his $8 million salary. When Titanic started production in 1995, the budget was set at around $120 million, which was already a massive amount of money for a film at that time. But as filming dragged on and James Cameron's perfectionist vision demanded more and more resources, the costs started spiraling completely out of control. By the time production was wrapping up, the budget had ballooned to $200 million, making it the most expensive movie ever made up to that point. The studio executives at Paramount were absolutely panicking because they had been promised one price and were now looking at something drastically different, and there was genuine fear throughout Hollywood that Titanic was going to become one of the biggest financial disasters in film history. Cameron knew that the studio felt misled, even though the cost overruns weren't intentional deception, but rather the reality of creating something on such an unprecedented scale. To prove his commitment to the project and show the studio that he wasn't just recklessly spending their money, Cameron made an extraordinary decision. He went to the executives and told them he was giving back his entire $8 million director's salary, and on top of that, he was forfeiting his percentage of the back-end profits as well. This meant that if the movie failed, he would walk away with nothing except the experience of making it, and if it succeeded, he wouldn't see a dime of the profits that a director would normally earn. It was an enormous gamble that could have cost him tens of millions of dollars if Titanic had flopped the way so many people expected it to. Cameron later appeared on The Howard Stern Show and explained his reasoning, saying they had told the studio it would cost $120 million, and that's what everyone thought it would be, so he didn't want them to think he had lied just to get the movie made. Of course, Titanic went on to become the highest-grossing film of all time at that point, earning over $1.8 billion worldwide, which means Cameron's sacrifice ended up costing him a fortune in lost earnings. But it also cemented his reputation as a director willing to put everything on the line for his vision. Fact 8. Kate Winslet and Leo DiCaprio actually peed in the water tank. When you watch the heartbreaking scenes of Rose and Jack floating in the freezing Atlantic Ocean after the ship sinks, you're probably not thinking about what was really happening behind the scenes. Kate Winslet recently revealed a pretty gross detail that changes how you'll view those iconic moments forever. She and Leonardo DiCaprio actually relieved themselves in the water tank while filming, rather than going through the hassle of climbing out every time nature called. Winslet opened up about this during a question and answer session before the release of her film Lee in 2024. She explained that the famous water tank where they filmed the sinking sequences wasn't nearly as deep or as dramatic as it looked on screen. In fact, the water was only waist height, which might burst the bubble for fans who imagined the actors floating in some massive deep pool. Despite the shallow depth, getting in and out of the tank was still a major production because of how the set was designed and how cold the water was kept to make their reactions look authentic. Between the frigid temperature of the water and the incredibly long trek they would have to make to actually exit the tank and reach a bathroom, both Winslet and DiCaprio made the practical decision to just go right there in the water. Winslet described the situation pretty matter-of-factly, admitting that when you're stuck in freezing cold water for hours on end during a grueling shoot, you do what you have to do. The alternative would have been climbing out, getting dried off, walking to the facilities, and then going through the whole process again to get back in and resume filming. For a production as demanding and time-sensitive as Titanic, that just wasn't realistic. So the next time you watch Rose desperately trying to wake Jack up in those final emotional moments, just remember that the water they're floating in became a bit more than just a movie set. Fact 9. James Cameron drew all of Jack's sketches, including the nude. One of the most iconic scenes in Titanic is when Jack sketches a nude portrait of Rose wearing nothing but the Heart of the Ocean necklace. But the hands you see drawing on screen don't actually belong to Leonardo DiCaprio. Those are director James Cameron's hands doing all the artwork, and there's a fascinating technical detail that makes this even more interesting. Before Cameron became one of Hollywood's most successful directors, he worked as an art director and production designer in the film industry, so drawing and sketching were already part of his skill set. When it came time to film the famous drawing scene, Cameron didn't trust anyone else to create the artwork that would be so prominently featured in the movie, so he drew every single sketch that appears in Jack's portfolio throughout the film, including the nude portrait of Kate Winslet's Rose. The technical challenge came from the fact that Cameron is left-handed, but the character of Jack Dawson was written as right-handed, so they couldn't just film Cameron's hands drawing in real time. To solve this problem, the production team filmed Cameron sketching the portrait with his left hand, and then during post-production, they mirror-imaged the footage so it would appear as though a right-handed artist was creating the drawing. This meant everything in the shot had to be carefully reversed to maintain the illusion. The nude sketch that Cameron created became so famous that it was later sold at auction in 2011 for $16,000, which is roughly £10,000. Cameron has said in interviews that he spent hours perfecting the drawing because he knew it would be scrutinized by millions of viewers and needed to look like the work of a talented young artist who had studied in Paris. The drawing scene itself was filmed with Cameron's hand standing in for DiCaprio's, and Kate Winslet has mentioned in interviews that having the director himself handling such an intimate moment actually made the scene less awkward than it might have been otherwise. Fact 10. All dialogue in the water scenes was re-recorded. One of the most iconic and heartbreaking sequences in Titanic shows Jack and Rose floating in the freezing Atlantic Ocean after the ship has gone down, clinging to a piece of wooden debris as they wait for rescue. The scene feels incredibly raw and intimate, with whispered conversations between the two characters as Jack slowly succumbs to hypothermia. But what most viewers don't realize is that none of the dialogue you hear in those emotional moments was actually captured during filming. Every single word had to be re-recorded later in a studio because of a major technical problem with the water tank. The issue came down to something called an infinity tank, which is a specialized pool designed to create the illusion of endless open water. To achieve this effect, water constantly flows over the edges of the tank and recirculates back in, which helps eliminate any visible boundaries that would break the cinematic illusion. It's a brilliant technique for making a contained filming environment look like the vast ocean, but it comes with one significant drawback. The water rushing over those edges creates an enormous amount of background noise, basically a constant roar that drowns out everything else. Kate Winslet revealed this detail years later during a question and answer session before the release of her film, Lee. She explained that the sound of the water was so loud and so constant that the microphone simply couldn't pick up any of the dialogue she and Leonardo DiCaprio were speaking to each other. Despite being right next to each other in the scene, their voices were completely lost in the noise. This meant that after all the difficult and physically demanding work of filming those scenes in cold water for hours, both actors had to return to a recording studio and perform all of their lines again through a process called ADR, which stands for Automated Dialogue Replacement. They had to watch the footage and match their new vocal performances to their lip movements on screen, essentially dubbing themselves in post-production to create the final version audiences would see and hear. Fact 11. Gloria Stewart was the only cast member alive during the real disaster. Gloria Stewart, who played the elderly version of Rose in Titanic, had a unique connection to the film that no other cast member could claim. She was born on July 4, 1910, which means she was actually alive when the real RMS Titanic sank in the North Atlantic Ocean on April 15, 1912. At the time of the disaster, Stewart was just under 2 years old, living in Santa Monica, California, making her the only person in the entire cast who had been alive during the actual tragedy. When James Cameron cast Stewart for the role in 1996, she was 86 years old, though she had to be aged up even further with makeup to portray the 101-year-old Rose Calvert. This casting choice created a remarkable bridge between the historical event and the film, with Stewart serving as a living link to that era. She had been a Hollywood actress during the 1930s, appearing in films like The Invisible Man and working alongside stars of Hollywood's golden age, but her career had largely faded by the 1950s. Stewart's performance in Titanic earned her an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress at age 87, making her the oldest nominee in that category at the time. The film brought her an entirely new level of fame that she had never experienced during her earlier career in the 30s and 40s. When the Oscar nominations were announced in February 1998, Stewart reportedly exclaimed, "Anchors aweigh," upon hearing the news. The historical coincidence becomes even more poignant when you consider that Stewart lived to be exactly 100 years old, the same age as her character Rose in the film. She passed away in September 2010, having experienced a career resurgence in her final years that few actors ever get to enjoy. Her presence in Titanic literally connected audiences to someone who had lived through the era when the real disaster shocked the world. Fact 12. The sinking happened in real time. One of the most remarkable and haunting aspects of Titanic is something most viewers never even notice while watching the film. From the moment the ship strikes the iceberg to the final scene when the stern slips beneath the waves, exactly 2 hours and 40 minutes pass in the movie. This isn't a coincidence or a rough estimate, it's a deliberate and precise recreation of the actual timeline from the real disaster that happened on April 15, 1912. James Cameron was obsessed with historical accuracy throughout the entire production, and this detail might be his most impressive commitment to authenticity. The real RMS Titanic hit the iceberg at 11:40 p.m. ship's time, and the vessel completely disappeared beneath the surface at 2:20 a.m. Cameron meticulously structured his film so that the audience experiences the tragedy in the exact same time frame as the passengers and crew did that night. Every moment of panic, every decision made by the crew, and every desperate attempt to survive unfolds at the same pace it did during the actual sinking. This means that when you're watching Jack and Rose running through flooding corridors or witnessing the chaos on the tilting decks, you're living through the disaster in real time. The film doesn't speed up or compress these events for dramatic effect. What you see is genuinely how long those people had from the moment of impact until the ship was gone. Cameron even made sure to show a close-up of a clock reading 2:15 during one of the final chaotic scenes, just 5 minutes before the actual ship went under. Creating this timeline wasn't just about matching the duration. It required incredible planning during filming and editing to make sure every scene fit perfectly within that 2-hour and 40-minute window. The attention to this kind of detail is what separates Titanic from other disaster films and helps explain why audiences felt such a powerful emotional connection to the tragedy. You weren't just watching a dramatization, you were experiencing the same terrifying countdown that over 1,500 people faced that night in the North Atlantic. Fact 13. "I'm the king of the world" was completely ad-libbed. One of the most iconic lines in movie history wasn't even in the original script. When Leonardo DiCaprio stands at the bow of the Titanic with his arms stretched wide and shouts, "I'm the king of the world," he was completely improvising in that moment, and James Cameron loved it so much that he kept it in the final cut of the film. The scene has become so legendary that it's almost impossible to think of Titanic without picturing DiCaprio in that exact pose, wind in his hair, declaring his triumph over the world from the front of the massive ship. What makes this even more interesting is how this spontaneous moment went on to define not just the movie, but DiCaprio's entire career at that time. The line captured something essential about Jack Dawson's character, his sense of freedom and possibility, and it did so in a way that felt completely natural and unforced. Cameron recognized that DiCaprio had tapped into something real, and the director's instinct to leave it in the movie proved to be absolutely right. The impact of this ad-libbed line went far beyond just the film itself. In 2007, Premiere magazine ranked "I'm the King of the World" as the number 4 greatest movie line of all time, placing it among some of the most carefully crafted and memorable dialogue ever written for cinema. It beat out countless lines that screenwriters had labored over for weeks or months, which makes DiCaprio's spontaneous delivery even more remarkable. The line became so embedded in popular culture that it's been quoted, parodied, and referenced thousands of times since the movie's release. Even James Cameron himself couldn't resist shouting it during his own moment of triumph when he won the Oscar for Best Director at the 1998 Academy Awards, pumping his golden statuette in the air while the audience laughed and cheered. That moment proved just how deeply the line had resonated with audiences around the world, turning a young actor's improvised outburst into one of the most quotable moments in film history. Fact 14. Kate Winslet got pneumonia from refusing to wear a wetsuit. Kate Winslet's dedication to making Titanic look as realistic as possible came at a serious cost to her health. During the intense water scenes where Rose and Jack are struggling to survive in the freezing Atlantic Ocean, the production team offered Winslet a wetsuit to wear underneath her costume. The wetsuit would have kept her warm and protected her from the cold water that was used to create the authentic feeling of the ship sinking. However, Winslet turned down the offer because director James Cameron wanted her dress to cling to her body in a natural way, which wouldn't have happened if she was wearing bulky protective gear underneath. Cameron didn't want the scene to look like what he called a wet t-shirt contest, but he did want the dress to behave realistically in the water, creating the genuine appearance of someone who had just plunged into the ocean. Winslet shared details about this decision in her personal diaries that were published by Vogue magazine back in 1997, explaining that Cameron's artistic vision required the fabric to move and stick to her body the way it naturally would in freezing water. So she spent hours and hours submerged in genuinely cold water without any thermal protection, which took a heavy toll on her body. The result of this commitment to authenticity was that Winslet ended up contracting pneumonia during the production. The illness was serious enough that she required medical treatment, though the exact details of her hospitalization have varied in different accounts over the years. Years later, Winslet reflected on the grueling experience of filming Titanic, going so far as to tell reporters that you'd have to pay her a fortune to work with James Cameron again because of how physically demanding and uncomfortable the shoot had been. Despite the painful experience, her refusal to compromise on the realism of those scenes contributed to some of the most memorable and emotionally powerful moments in the entire film. Fact 15. It was the first film with 2 Oscar nominations for the same character. When the Academy Award nominations were announced in February 1998, Titanic made Oscar history in a way that had never happened before. Kate Winslet received a nomination for Best Actress for her portrayal of young Rose DeWitt Bukater, the 17-year-old aristocrat who falls in love with Jack Dawson aboard the doomed ship. At the same time, Gloria Stewart earned a nomination for Best Supporting Actress for playing the same character as a 101-year-old survivor in the film's present-day framing sequences. This marked the first time in the history of the Academy Awards that 2 different actors were nominated for playing the exact same character in the same film. The dual nomination was particularly remarkable because both performances were integral to telling Rose's complete story across different time periods. Winslet carried the emotional weight of the historical romance and tragedy, while Stewart brought depth and poignancy to the elderly Rose, who recounts her memories of that fateful voyage. Stewart was 87 years old when she received her nomination, making her the oldest acting nominee in Academy Award history at that time, a record that stood until Christopher Plummer surpassed it years later when he was nominated at age 88 for All the Money in the World. The competition that year was fierce. While Winslet was up against actresses like Helen Hunt and Julie Christie in the Best Actress category, Stewart faced off against Kim Basinger, Minnie Driver, and Julianne Moore in the Best Supporting Actress race. Ultimately, neither Winslet nor Stewart took home the Oscar that night. Helen Hunt won Best Actress for As Good as It Gets, while Kim Basinger won Best Supporting Actress for L.A. Confidential. However, Stewart did tie with Basinger for the Screen Actors Guild Award in the same category, giving her at least one major trophy for her remarkable comeback performance. Despite not winning the Oscar, both actresses became forever linked in film history for their unprecedented dual recognition, proving that Rose's character resonated powerfully across both timelines of the story.